Many people imagine that the extinction of the woolly mammoth was a short-time event that happened after the end of the last ice age around 10,000 years ago, but things are way more complicated. The decline of the woolly mammoth population was gradual rather than immediate. The main reason for their extinction was climate change and the lack of suitable lands in the vastness of Eurasia. Mossy tundra began to replace grasses, depriving the massive animals of their most important food source. To survive, some mammoths migrated to remote and isolated islands in the polar circle and existed here for thousands of years after most of the population became extinct about 10,000 years ago. The story of the last mammoth colony who lived on a remote Arctic island in Russia can give us some explanations of what really killed that great animal, because the last woolly mammoth colony became extinct only 3,700 years ago, at the time when Egyptians were building their pyramids and Mesopotamians were composing the Epic of Gilgamesh. Around 10,000 years ago, the woolly mammoth became stranded on Wrangle Island due to the last ice age. This occurred because the region of Beringia, which once connected Eurasia to North America and Wrangle Island to mainland Eurasia, was inundated by melting ice. As a result, Wrangle Island was separated from mainland Eurasia by a distance of 140 kilometers of water. The isolation of the island was the primary factor in the mammoth survival in that area. Another group that survived for thousands of years after the mammoth extinction on the mainland was a small colony of animals that lived on St. Paul's Island near Alaska, which separated for the same reason. St. Paul's colony lasted for another 5,000 years after the separation, but the island itself was 70 times smaller than Wrangle Island, which contributed to the collapse of the colony. The remains of algae and aquatic invertebrates indicated that the level and the quality of water in the lake, which was the main water source of the woolly mammoth on the island, were decreasing. Scientists analyzed the bones of 14 mammoths found in different parts of the island and found that the climate was becoming increasingly dry. Researchers suggest that this was the primary cause of the population's demise. The first humans appeared on the island only in 1787, so they couldn't cause the collapse of their population. However, we can't tell the same about Wrangle's Island. Evidence for prehistoric human occupation was uncovered in 1975 at the Chertovo Wrak site. Various stone and ivory tools were found, including a togling harpoon. Radiocarbon dating shows that human inhabitation roughly coeval with the last mammoth on the island 3,700 years ago. Though no direct evidence of mammoth hunting has been found, it remains a scientific hypothesis. This can lead us to a conclusion that the very last mammoths on the island were probably killed by our ancestors, but we can't be sure about it. Wrangle Island represents itself as a typical Arctic tundra, where more than half of the island is covered with small mountains. The flora of the island includes 417 species of plants, double that of any other Arctic tundra territory of comparable size, and more than any other Arctic island. While other populations died out as climate change changed the composition of their environment and genetic diversity shrunk in their isolated populations, the Wrangle mammoth thrived. Even today, that island is still considered the perfect place to live for that gigantic animal, but the word gigantic can't be applied to that mammoth colony. Various studies shows that mammoths from the Wrangle Island were different from Siberian or Beringian ones. That small group belongs to the dwarf mammoth, a subspecies of the woolly mammoth. They are smaller and shorter than a typical woolly mammoth. Their height was only up to 2.5 meters, compared with 3.5 meters of the normal one. Their weight was only up to 2 tons, compared with 6 tons of the normal one. The amount of their population is another controversial issue. Some studies tell us that there were no more than 500 individuals. Others tell us that the number of dwarf mammoths never exceeded 1,000 creatures. Yet, their amount wasn't enough to reproduce the healthy generations. This population was so isolated isolated and so small that it didn't have much genetic diversity. Research published in 2017 suggested that the Wrangle woolly mammoth colony essentially experienced a genetic meltdown in its DNA, consistent with harmful genome evolution. Scientists have suggested that their bachelor lifestyle led to the death of many male mammoths. Young males, after reaching sexual maturity, left the maternal group and went to wander alone or in small groups. In unfamiliar areas, mammoths more often fell into natural traps from which they couldn't escape, and there was no one to help them. Recent research has compared the complete DNA sequences of a 4,300-year-old mammoth bone from Wrangle Island with that of a 4,500,000-year-old specimen that lived on the Siberian mainland. The results reveal a series of significant mutations in the Wrangle Island mammoth that would have had a detrimental effect on animals' ability to detect smells, recognize territory, determine rank, and choose mates. One of the most alarming facts discovered by scientists was the low quality of sperm, which also affected the reproduction of the population on the island. This research sheds light on how harmful mutations tend to build up in small, isolated populations that become inbreed, a phenomenon called genomic meltdown. The Wrangle Island mammoths provide a rare opportunity to observe the theory play out in a real population. When options for a mate are limited, undesirable genetic traits aren't weeded out. So the study examined only one specimen from the island. Researchers are convinced that its genetics would closely match the island's other mammoths, as the number and types of difference between its genome and that of the older mainland mammoth fit mathematical predictions for how much genetic variation should exist between two individuals from the same population. The Wrangle mammoth extinction was caused by a unique combination of factors. Unlike other mammoths that died due to habitat loss or lack of food, the Wrangle mammoth bone samples showed an increase in sulfur levels towards the end of their existence. This indicates that bedrock weathering released harmful minerals that polluted their water supply. Their declining health was further compounded by an extreme weather event, where rain and snow created a thick layer of ice on the ground, preventing the mammoth from foraging and causing them to starve. This short-time starvation period was probably the main reason why they became extinct. When compared to their Siberian counterparts who relied on fat reserves to survive intense winters, the Wrangle mammoth likely expended less energy because their habitat conditions weren't as fierce as on mainland Eurasia, which tell us that the mammoths from Wrangle Island weren't able to withstand harsh winters. Theoretically, it would still be possible for them to live in the current circumstances, because the newest researches show us that woolly mammoths from Wrangle Island didn't experience difficulties with the availability and quality of food. This leads us to a logical conclusion that the main reason for the woolly mammoth extinction weren't the human inhabitants or lack of food variety on the island. Most likely, a majority of the woolly mammoth population died during the icing of the island, and the remaining part was either killed by humans or starved to death. This is a great example of how a small, isolated population can become extinct not only because of the genomic meltdown, but also because of the different factors which make animals unadapted to further evolution. It's sad to see how such a great animal had such a sad end.